In this week's episode, our special guest is Marcel from Coinbase.
Think of Coinbase as your on-ramp into digital assets and crypto technologies.
Marcel's going to be talking about the future of crypto.
Blockchain technologies is just the most secure and efficient ledger we'll ever produce.
But also looking at some of the pieces and intricacies about how L2 chains and L1 chains are actually going to interact with each other.
The cash flows that come from that are all going to be natively digital. So this is all atomic settlement, end-to-end running on a layer 2 called Base, the layer 2 that Coinbase has produced. And at the end of the day, your asset lives on chain.
This conversation is hyper interesting on many levels.
Marcel, let's dive in.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
Marcel, you're the senior executive officer of Coinbase in Abu Dhabi and the deputy CIO of Coinbase Asset Management. Tell us a little bit about what is Coinbase to people who don't know what Coinbase is. There might be some people who don't know what Coinbase is.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Think of Coinbase as your on-ramp into digital assets and crypto technologies. In the initial instance, if you think of Coinbase as a regulation-first enterprise, so they built their reputation on a safe on-ramp into that space.
Yeah.
And now, as we enter the future, the focus is very much on bringing individuals and institutions on-chain. That'll be the next leg of how we think about the future of finance will be that on-chain version of finance.
Yeah.
And Coinbase is in a leadership position in that regard.
And Brian Armstrong, your founder and CEO, has talked about the future of finance being on-chain. What does that mean? Unpack that for us.
I love the term because it captures exactly the sentiment of where things are headed, and it shows the steps that are required. So you think of that initial step into cryptocurrencies was through banking rails and through very traditional rails.
Yeah.
And all the while, here you have this fellow who's smart enough to see so far down the road that he understood that the future of finance was on chain, and these are just stepping stones. So what does what does that mean?
What does on-chain mean?
If you think of blockchain technologies as just the most secure and efficient ledger we'll ever produce. So we could use a spreadsheet, but it's not very secure. So we've created now a mechanism to record transactions and property rights in the most secure manner that we can imagine, bulletproof by way of mathematics. So then as more and more things migrate to on-chain, the ability to then move those property rights or leverage those property rights to provide other services grows. So the spirit of the future of finance is on-chain is we're going to get all these things in that blockchain ledger. And then once it's all in that ledger, think of all the things we can do with that. Where are we seeing this most clearly in a practical example? Sonify. So Sony, 80-year-old company, has created their own layer 2 called Sonify.
Right.
Their Web3. Their Web3 product.
Right.
If you want to do anything with Sony's IP, you're going to do it within Sonify because they're going to bring all their IP on chain. So now all of a sudden you're sitting in that Web3 environment, creating all this content, using all your creative juices within the Sony guardrails.
Right.
So now Sony still has a brand value.
Yeah.
And yet the people are individually creating all this value add within that guardrail. So I think that's a microcosm of where other companies are now looking out the window and saying, oh, geez, we get it. This is way more effective for the transfer of these property rights, a way more effective way of doing it.
Yeah. Can we double click on that point you made about doing it on-chain is more secure, it's safer? How did your personal journey overlap with that, your professional journeys? And what was your aha moment of the eureka moment? I don't know if you jumped out of a bathtub and ran down a street in Canada or in Washington, D.C., like that kind of
or whatever
Archimedes
the modern
movement.
Is.
Modern equivalent of Archimedes running down a bath, running down a street naked. What was your aha moment? Hold that thought.
Yeah, exactly. I'm picturing a movie where the
Brian Armstrong comes out of the shower or whatever.
No. In my case is much simpler.
Wrong podcast.
I was reading a science magazine and
a science magazine.
A science magazine. And I saw Bitcoin in the science magazine. I'm pretty sure it was a New Scientist. I mean, it's the one science magazine I go through every week religiously. So it could have been another. Could have been I was on an airplane. And I just grabbed another, but I'm almost certain it was a
Popular
scientist.
science.
Yeah, it could be. And I was intrigued, because I really like the plumbing of the financial system. It's one of the things that especially during the financial crisis. If you made it through the financial crisis in one piece, it's because you had a respect and appreciation for balance sheets and financial plumbing. And I made it out in one piece plus a bit. So looking at Bitcoin, I was like, okay, what's the point? I was intrigued, but I couldn't wrap my head around it. So then I would inquire with colleagues, right? Oh, geez, do you understand Bitcoin and this new blockchain technology and how you think about a digital ledger and da-da-da? And they're like, you're crazy. Like, what are you spending any time on this for?
This is like 2012?
2012.
And which part of the world are you in at this time?
I am a visiting scholar at the International Monetary Fund during the European crisis.
Sitting out of North America.
Yeah.
In DC.
Yeah. Now, interestingly, folks at the IMF, way more open-minded than I would have guessed. Folks in traditional finance were the ones that were shutting it down. Folks at the IMF were like, that's interesting. Because think, you have SDR.
Yeah.
SDR is kind of redundant. You're like, well, what if this thing lived on digital rails? And what if it played the role that it was supposed to play in the 1970s as a substitution for the dollar?
Yeah. Yeah.
Now all of a sudden, so you can have a conversation around that within the IMF.
Yeah. I mean, the Libra project, rest in peace, was basically, when I remember when it came out, this is like Facebook doing an SDR.
Right.
It was just like an SDR.
Yeah. Super interesting.
You're right.
Super interesting. And then, and
too early.
Too early.
Too early.
Too early or wrong. You know, here's the hard part with baskets, currency baskets. Yeah. I don't really want to trade a currency basket.
No.
I can hedge whatever dollar exposure I don't want.
They should just started with the dollar, but
Yeah.
Would have been easy. Yeah. But we're going off the point.
futuristic.
Getting back to 2012.
Yes.
2012.
Took literally 5 years until I felt like I had it.
Okay.
I was running a network node. At some point, I tinkered around with mining, and it was so loud. It's like, turn that off. So then I ended up with and then I run a node, and I'm so excited. I'm showing my son, he was a little guy at the time, and I was like, look at this. And he was like, what does it do? I'm like, nothing. but
were you using Kodak miners?
You're getting the updated chain, right? You're getting the updated
right.
chain, and you can see all the network nodes. And I was like, we are a part of the security of this new financial system. And he's like, I'm going back to my Minecraft, Dad. See you later.
You stick with your mining. I'll do my
exactly.
Minecraft.
So so it was, but it took me a very long time to appreciate what it could become. And now the irony, you fast forward and you think, okay, so I pictured Bitcoin as your base layer that you're going to build upon, and the only thing we use Bitcoin for is digital gold. So you acquire it, you stuff it under your mattress the same way you would gold. So I'm like, well, geez, that sounds a lot like a meme coin. You know, it's not, right? It's different in spirit and in principle, but because you can build, Taproot assets exist. We can build on Bitcoin. We've demonstrated that. Colored coins existed early on. So there's lots you can do, but you're not. The stablecoin market is dominated by Ethereum. Yeah. You know, so it's interesting that people were drawn to this concept of Bitcoin. It's the dominant asset in the ecosystem still. It's serving the role of the pristine unit of collateral in the ecosystem. But from a functionality standpoint, it's like, you want to do something fun with your Bitcoin, wrap it and move it over to ETH. You know?
Well, yeah. Or regret buying Domino's pizzas with it, right?
My goodness.
Yeah. So there's that too. Yeah. So very interesting. So it took you 5 years afterwards.
5 years. Yeah.
To get into the space. But was that again from an investing perspective, from a career perspective?
So I bought a tiny amount in 2012, and it was just kind of out of principle. The deal.
Experiment.
My wife is the head of our investment committee, so she was like,
Sounds
"You
familiar.
have no idea what you're talking about, so you're welcome to buy some, but not much." And back then it was coming out of your bank account.
She was in charge of position limits.
Yeah, so I was like, "Okay, great risk manager."
Risk committee.
And she's English literature, right? So I would have to explain it in a manner where she was like, "I get what we're doing," and look, I didn't understand it well enough.
Yeah.
So then with time I understood it better, and then that changed, but. Took a very, very small position then, regrettably, and then once I felt like I had the conviction in what it could become, I was like, look, it still could become nothing, but at least I understand its purpose.
Yeah.
And that was in a bear market.
Oh, wow.
So it was so then it became a patience game.
Yeah.
And then in 2020 I made the switch over
To Coinbase. No.
We were acquired.
Okay.
It was One River Digital, and then we were
okay.
acquired by Coinbase
Got
to
it.
become Coinbase Asset Management.
Got
Yeah.
it. Got it.
Wow.
And now you're based in Abu Dhabi.
Based in Abu Dhabi. Yeah, 18 months. It's been great. Yeah, great.
What do you think about that, Gaurav? Abu Dhabi,
I'm intrigued.
crypto,
Yeah.
blockchain.
I mean, sounds so surprising and shocking, but but curious to learn more for sure. We have to definitely open that up and understand why a large institution that's regulated first from a products perspective and expanding globally would open. Is it your second office, or is it your first office outside of North America, or is it
Canada's the biggest office outside of the U.S.
technically right?
And then there's offices in Singapore and London,
okay.
but we now have I am our UAE office, which has been great.
So what's happening on the ground here? What brings you here? What's the idea?
It's really interesting. We were running a fund called Digital Credit. Super proud, suffered no losses during crypto winter, so it was very carefully
wow.
managed. Now, the reason why we suffered no losses, we were super conservative in the bull market. So we understood this layering of leverage that was happening in DeFi, and we wouldn't do it. We're like, look, we're aiming to deliver alpha product solutions to institutions, and as we were looking into DeFi carefully, we're like, that is not institutional. So you can do it personally, have fun with it, learn, but it's not institutional. So we're basically doing over-collateralized Bitcoin lending.
Okay.
Now, I think of over-collateralized Bitcoin lending as kind of like the risk-free rate in Bitcoin, right? And there's a congestion of capital, there's a shortage of capital, so that risk-free rate's unusually high. And as more and more capital comes into the system, that's going to compress. So we were earning what I thought was an outsized return for effectively no counterparty risk because we were collateralized by a 24/7 super liquid asset and with really great LTVs. So that proved to be true, which was interesting. Then in that exploration, we were like, okay, so what's the problem with DeFi? Why isn't it institutional? And we were noodling it. And then my boss says, okay, tough guys, ideas are cheap. Ideas are free.
Yeah.
Do it, right? We're now entering a bear market in crypto. Do it. Like if you think there's something to do here, and there's a gentleman, Sean Martinack, on the team who's like just an engineering whiz who has a ton of background in institutional investing. And we just started. And I was kind of, in the initial instance, I was the super user. He was the super executor. And we started building out this platform that think of it like institutional DeFi. FTX happens. We figured this would be regulated. Same approach, regulation first, regulatory first approach. So that was our approach. Slower approach, harder to get to big numbers, but we thought that was the only way you're going to achieve scale. So as we're building, in the back of our minds, we're like, look, this is going to be regulated in the UK, the US, Canada, whatever it may be. And FTX happens and everything kind of tightens up. And all the while, ADGM is like, look, we had written about what we were doing. Yeah. It compared very favorably to what they wanted to do. So they said, would you take a look at ADGM? And I didn't know what it stood for. I'd never been to UAE.
So this is your own team saying, would you have a look at ADGM?
And our own team and ADGM.
Oh, wow, together.
So we're like, okay. So then I came 3 times, and I was very positively inclined. And they said, look, if you can get senior presence here to make a commitment to the project, we'll give it a go. And that's how I got here. I know.
Wow.
I sat down at the table with the wife and kids, and my son was just about college age, and we said, look, let's give it a go. So that's and now we have an institutional DeFi, effectively an institutional DeFi platform called Project Diamond that's under regulatory leadership of ADGM.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Let's double click on that.
Yeah.
Project Diamond. What is it? Explain it to me like I'm a English literature
And
graduate.
who can participate and who can benefit from it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. So right now it sits inside the regulatory lab of ADGM.
Yeah.
And think of it as a natively digital platform that lets you sell, buy, trade those digital assets.
As an individual or as a company or
Institutional.
as a okay.
Institutional.
What is
first step is
sorry to
institutional.
interrupt. What does natively digital mean?
So let's rewind and then go forward.
Sure.
So think of a bond. We don't call them electronic bonds and paper bonds, right? Just call them bonds because it's a bond. Yeah. So I always love Disney bonds, right? I like bonds. People don't like bonds. I kind of like bonds. Remember the Disney bonds would give. Maybe I'm showing my age here. Disney bonds would give you the little coupons, and the coupons were very special because they had special art of the very different Disney characters. And that was
on
your
the
coupon.
bonds themselves?
On the bonds. Yeah.
Wow.
By the way, this just stopped.
Coupon clipping.
This just stopped. They were very, very special. So they were artistic.
Collectibles.
Just stopped, right? This
Okay.
just
You're not into
just
like
stopped.
1600 Dutch water
And
bonds
then-
or something like that, are you?
No. This is recent. This is
Because I'm
recent.
buying.
Believe it
Is
or
that
not.
what you were going to say next?
No, I'm just seeing how historical we're gonna get. You know?
No. This is recent. This stopped only recently.
Okay.
And obviously now you're going to go on interactive brokers or whatever and buy a bond, and you're going to see a little line that says, I own a bond. And we're not going to say, oh, you own the electronic version of Disney and you own the paper. No. You own rights to cash flows that Disney produces. So natively digital assets will compete with with an electronic asset. So what is natively digital? If you want to issue commercial paper, I think of it in risk terms. Stablecoin is the lowest end of the risk spectrum. You're just long cash. And now they've been around long enough and performed well enough that we don't have to worry as to whether that's an effective use of the technology. It is. It's amazing. What's the next step out from that? Well, I have stablecoin. I wouldn't mind some yield, like a money fund.
Yeah.
So you can tokenize a money fund. That's fine. You're duplicating costs, right? So if I take an existing paper fund and I say, yeah, now I'm going to put it on chain. Well, now I have to pay for all that stuff too.
Yeah.
Right. So it's a reasonable first step because it gets people comfortable with that.
Yeah.
But what's the step? What's the more natural step? You go natively digital, which means I'm going to issue some commercial paper the old-fashioned way,
Fresh.
and I'm going to issue a little bit as a token.
Directly on the chain.
Directly on chain.
Yeah.
So we've devised a system that allows you to. It looks like a Web 2 experience. You log into the system. So if you're admitted into the networks, you have to clear your AML, KYC. Not anyone can participate, so it's quite restrictive. Once you clear all those hurdles, you're in the network. You can imagine in the future, 1 billion people on this. They log in. It tells you what group you're allowed to participate in. So you log in. You're on a web page. And the web page tells you, here are all the upcoming auctions. Here are all the upcoming deals, if you will, that you can participate in. Coinbase is going to issue a 1-month piece of paper and the indication of recent auctions is that it's going to trade around 6 to 7%, let's say, just making it up. I walk into the website, I put in my auction parameters. I want to bid this at this time. Auction clears. I get my allocation. All that's happening on digital rails. In a wallet, in a crypto wallet, I'm going to be delivered a token that represents the commercial paper that I would have on my Interactive Brokers account. The cash flows that come from that are all going to be natively digital. So this is all atomic settlement, end-to-end running on a layer 2 called Base, the layer 2 that Coinbase has produced. And at the end of the day, your asset lives on chain. Now think of it if you have a portfolio like that and you have a whole slew of assets that live like that. Now you have all this data sitting on the blockchain, super secure and trustworthy. My middle office, my risk management, is this 15 lines of code. Because now I can just summon the data in real time. I can just summon the data. Oh, you want it as an Excel add-in? Boom, we'll make it an Excel add-in. It's so much more efficient than what we're accustomed to. But I think the way we achieve that scale is you get people started. And the way you get them started, you do a 1-day loan. You do a 1-day loan for $1. And then they'll be like, okay, I see how it works. So that's what we've done with ADGM.
Yeah. That's a great line. Middle and back office, 15 lines of code.
There's a bit of a but who can do this today? So it's in a space that's live, or as you were saying, it's in a
reg lab. So it's quite contained because the way I think of the Reg Lab, I'm really impressed by how ADGM has done it. Look, every operator wants those to move faster.
Always.
So yeah, we're the same. It's like I feel like we could do a lot more. But at the same time, I'm like, this is our journey, right? We have self-selected into a regulatory first approach. So we have to be patient. There's no point in not being patient. So then how do you get to the desired endpoint? Education.
Mm-hmm.
I'm learning too, not just them. So we go back and forth. So we try to anticipate, well, what if I were in their shoes and I have an hour a week to spend on data related to our project? What kind of data do they want to see? And we deliver them that data proactively and preemptively. So we say, okay, here's the activity that happened during the week, all subject to their approval, by the way. Here's the data. Here's the format of that data the way you like it. Oh yeah, and here's an Excel pull down if you just want to pull the data in real time yourself. So you don't even have to ask us. You can just do it. Now, we send it once a week anyhow. So all that education process is for what purpose? So that they can understand every single part of the architecture of the transaction. Wow. And then they can say, aha, we need, what's the AML KYC process? Can that go on chain? Who's supplying that service? Oh, is that a UAE company? Oh, great. That's another piece of the UAE architecture. What about your banking on rails? Who's your banking partner? So then all of a sudden you get into the micro details of the plumbing. And then once they see all that plumbing laid out, they're like, oh, this is great. We get it. We get it. So then you graduate from the Reg Lab, fingers crossed. You do a great job. You graduate from the Reg Lab. And then we're an operating company. And once we're an operating company, then it's just a matter of onboarding institutions and then starting activity.
And where,
so we're
where
getting
are you
there.
in that journey? In terms of when do you, how far are you along the process of the Reg Lab? And
it's a great question.
An open,
hard to say. It's dynamic. Right. I would say we're far along.
Yeah,
we're far along. I think there's a lot of mutual understanding as to what we're doing and where we're headed over the next 2 years.
Right.
We have a lot of prototypes built.
Right.
They've
So
seen all of the
today,
prototypes.
if I'm an institutional investor or a counterparty, I can use this platform in the Reg Lab.
Yeah. If you came to us, let's say you wanted to, let's say you had excess cash you wanted to manage and you wanted an on-chain experience. We could say, we have a borrower, we have somebody that needs capital, and they have Bitcoin as collateral. Why don't we do an over-collateralized Bitcoin loan on-chain? And it can be that can be a completely natively digital transaction because in a lot of instances, like if you're doing something that has off-chain property rights, well, you got to port those property rights on chain or have something to point to those property rights off chain. So that's kind of a two-step process. In the case of an over-collateralized Bitcoin loan, that whole loan loop can exist on chain.
Got it.
So if somebody approached us and said, look, we want to execute this transaction because A, we love the risk-free rate in Bitcoin. It's clearly capital starved. We can fill that gap. And B, this is a simple place to start. Trusted source, carefully regulated, transparent. So that would be the nature of the transaction. We would ensure that ADGM is on board for executing that transaction while in the Reg Lab, and away we go.
Right. And just sort of double clicking on this concept of finance on chain, there are so many chains now. It sort of reminds me, it's a very hackneyed and overused analogy of the railways and chains. But if you go back to the 1830s and 40s, and all these railway lines were being built in England and then in Germany and then in other parts of the world like Argentina. And they were like, I don't know if it was hundreds, but it was dozens of railway lines, because you can still go around London and look at the train stations and
Great Western.
See exactly.
Great
I was on a
Western
Great
Rail,
Western
yeah.
train
There
this
you go.
weekend.
Brunel.
There you go.
Brunel.
Going
See
up
the
to Oxford.
difference.
And like every station was like, I love going to the stations and like they're built in different times. So it was the same operator, right? And we kind of in that same phase when it comes to blockchain.
Yeah.
We have these multiplicities of chains. So two sort of related questions. One is, double click on Base and tell us a little bit about Base. You just mentioned that. And secondly, related to that, how many chains do we need and why?
Yeah, both great questions.
Easy question. On the second one.
I mean, think of any layer two.
Yeah.
again, maybe one again, rewind and then forward.
And maybe for the audience who are not like crypto native, explain what layer 2 means.
Yeah. So in traditional finance, I think it'll become a little more clear.
Yeah.
Fed wire. Let's think of Fed wire as a layer 1.
Yeah.
None of us use it.
Yeah.
Right. And then so who's the layer 2 in that case? The banks.
Yeah.
The banking system.
Right.
So or think of block and credit card transactions. So you're bundling up a bunch of transactions and then sending them down for finality.
Yep.
And by bundling the transactions, instead of having one by one, which is quite costly, you're like, well, I'm going to batch them in hundreds.
Yeah, batch processing.
Yeah,
Correct.
batch process. That's it.
Yeah,
That's it.
Yeah.
So you think of these, how do you make these layer ones, that base layer, that Fed wire, that better be secure.
Yeah.
That's got to be bulletproof, right?
Yeah.
Well, how do you make it bulletproof? Oh, it's a little bit slower than you would like, a little bit all of these things, right?
Yeah.
So then what happens is you think of the initial criticism of every central banker in crypto. It's too slow.
Yeah.
It doesn't do anything. And you're like, well, there's a solution to that problem. It's a batch process, and you use it all the time, and everyone uses it with you. It wasn't that hard to figure out.
No.
I'm like, that's not going to age well.
Yeah.
So that batch process is what Base would do with Ethereum.
Right.
Right. So you're gonna batch to end up with a much reduced cost. So the cost post upgrade to Ethereum last year, the Dankun upgrade, the cost of transacting on average has come down over 90%.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's
massive,
a lot.
Massive. So
It's
that's how you get to
inverted
adoption. So
scenario
now all
altogether.
of a sudden I can send you a dollar stablecoin for free, basically.
So do I still need the L2s in the future?
You will. I think you'll need. You're either going to need a bunch of them,
Okay.
like Sony creating their layer 2 because they
Right.
have a brand.
Yeah.
Like so, we're not even going to think
That's
of
a
it as a layer
hyper-relevant
2.
example, right?
We're not going to think of it as layer 2s. Like we're going to forget about the layers and
Yeah.
just be like, I want to do stuff with Sony.
Yeah.
How do I do that? Oh, I go into this thing.
Yeah.
Great.
Right.
And that'll be a
Sony
Web3 experience, and people will be like, whatever.
Yeah.
I just want to have fun in. It's like my son with Minecraft.
Yeah.
He's like, I just want to create, man.
Yeah.
And it may not look great to you, but I love it. And this is many years ago. I don't know if it's still a thing anymore, actually. But
Minecraft?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. He loved it.
My
So
10-year-old's still into it. I'm
so
not sure
like-
my 22-year-old is, but my 10-year-old.
you just have
I
to
think
have
once you're into
fun.
it, it just sticks with you.
Yeah.
You just have to have so I think it's going to shift massively toward user experience, away from jargon, and then it's just going to be, okay, what do we need to do to deliver what people want? So what does Sony probably want to do with Sony? They want to play video games on the darn thing. There's not fast enough throughput. They're going to solve that problem. They have to solve that problem. So will
It's
that be a
amazing
layer?
to get licensing
3 or
rights
whatever
and
be-
access
yeah,
to
yeah,
things.
yeah.
That I want to create a Spider-Verse within my Minecraft scenario with licensing rights from Sony.
Yeah.
Gets
As
better.
a toll gate, and then I
They-
can do that as a contract and share revenue with Sony or pay them a fee or
They created
limitless, right?
Sonify as well, which
Yeah.
is their exchange.
Well, there you go. I mean, it's limitless, right? The interactive capability you need. You don't need lawyers in a room to think about value of a certain contract or a piece. It can just be automatically patched in.
Now here's where it gets really, really neat.
Okay.
When you think of it in this context. So now imagine you have how many chains? You're going to have a ton of chains. You may only have a couple of core underlying chains that we stop thinking about, the same way we stop thinking about FedWire.
Yeah.
You have all these chains, and they're kind of branded,
Yeah.
right? They have to communicate, right? They're going to communicate the same way that FedWire and the ECB system have to communicate. So they're going to have to communicate.
Yeah.
So then you think, okay, how do I think about that infrastructure? So then what's interesting, you go to, and this, I hate to keep bringing up Sony. I don't know anything about the company, but I'm so intrigued by the project because it's new.
Yeah.
But if you...
Oh, you should visit the Sony head office because if you look at the wall, they have one of these kind of display walls of all their innovations. And if you grew up like roughly in our generation, we grew up with Sony.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Like
sure.
the kids
They
today
were
are
made.
absolutely
Sony Walkman was
everything
like,
was Sony.
Forget it.
Yeah,
It was
and then
revolutionary.
that kind of from the 1960s to 80s, that kind of
jump.
I mean, it was like it was it.
Yeah.
It was it. Yeah. So anyway, getting back to the double clicking on the.
So then you've got all these chains, right?
Chains, yeah.
So then, if the one really interesting thing with these technologies is transparency.
Yeah.
So what Sony has done is they said, okay, here's what we built. They can't hide what they've used to build it. They're leveraging a ton of open source software and other things like it. So it's really the brand value that they're delivering rather than the tech stack per se.
Right.
But if you go to their main page, they'll say, yeah, by the way, here's the infrastructure we're using to make this
Or is
go
it
from.
Hyperledger Fabric, or is
It's
it?
Optimism, Chainlink.
Okay.
It's a mishmash.
Yeah. Circle. So then I think, okay, I'm clever and I work really hard, so I can go through and study the entire. I think infrastructure is critical. I'm financial plumbing.
You love the plumbing.
Financial
You
plumbing.
love the financial
So I
plumbing.
can go through and go piece by piece. But I'm like, we're so early that I'm like, I don't know if this one's better than that one. But I know Sony is. I know what Sony's betting on. They've just told me, right? So they think Chainlink is a really important part of the future infrastructure of blockchain technologies in a multi-chain world. Interesting. They think Circle's a really important piece of that. They think Optimism's a really important. So I pay attention to that. Now I'm like, okay, I'm going to dive on those because now they've just created a filter for me. I'm like, super.
Oh, wow.
Super. They've just been my little research assistant. That's
I see
helpful.
the thread you're pulling on. So you're like, okay, if you're doing Circle, I could almost go to the parents. If I'm going to Chainlink, I can almost go to gaming or something else. And if I go to Optimus, I can go to other pieces as well,
So
right?
you can. That's
Because
it.
those communities within the Web3 ecosystem are specialized or have active engagement of developers or creators.
And then it becomes self-fulfilling, right? So
That's
this is-
interesting. Way of,
This is interesting.
of reading code.
So if that's the right way of thinking about the multiple layer twos, then you're like, have hundreds of thousands. Like every bank will be a layer two. You have as many as you like, as long as they can function. As long as there's some central meeting place, or doesn't not central meeting place, decentralized meeting place with tools that allow for that communication. You know, bridging between those universes. But then the interesting bit will be, so then how do you keep those walls? Because
Settlement, treasury, my brain is going, oh my God.
Yeah. It's wild. It's wild.
Oh, wow.
And then then you think of the infrastructure that the person is going to want. They don't want to know.
But they're not going to see it.
Well, that's it. So the software design, it's almost like AI in that sense. Everyone's focused on the
So you're talking.
hardware design.
So then you're looking at a micro switch. You're looking at a micro switch almost. In
Somebody's
a way.
going to design.
Yeah, someone's going to design a micro switch. Yeah.
A singular interface that just says, I'm playing around on Sony PlayStation. Is that what it is? PlayStation? Yeah, I'm going to play on Sony PlayStation, right? And it's going to be on Web3.
Yeah.
And they're not going to know the exact layer two that they're on. They're not going to use that language.
It's funny
They're
that you
just
say
gonna
that.
play.
Yeah, because today there is a friend's company which allows you, for example, today to play FIFA with your friends. And if your friends are playing FIFA on a PlayStation, you can show up as the second team sitting out of a cafe in Brazil from a web browser on a computer. So you can actually go in and play. And then there's sports betting, and then there's other things also, and then it gets into tournament phase, and then it's, people can stake you or back you, and there's so many other pieces to this. So it's, wow, hyper interesting to see where it will go, though.
But that's the future. You can see it. Who knows how long it takes, but you can see it. So then when you think of so what's a financial transaction in that world? My goodness, it becomes so broad.
I mean, but we're talking about gaming. Gaming's always been one of the first entry places on new technologies for adoption, whether it's the monetization of it or whether it's the access of it, right, in different ways. But you talked about Project Diamond, and you said there were other things you were doing as well. I don't know how much time we have. Can you tell us about some of the other things you're also doing out here in the regulated space, so with ADGM on the projects and the kind of institutions you're working on?
Yeah, the prototypes that we're building inside of Project Diamond are quite varied. So we've explored everything from space markets, which is really interesting.
What's
So-
what's a space
Isn't
market?
it's
Yeah, go on.
clever,
You
isn't
have
it?
to now. You have to
Yeah,
pull the thread.
yeah,
We
no.
have to pull the thread.
I know, future
But
of-
think of it in,
Yeah, future of France.
well,
to
first of
future
all,
of Mars.
we know that
Yeah.
data centers are going up, right? We're gonna push them up.
Yeah.
So then their data centers are going to have to communicate. That's going to be a financial transaction. So there's going to be something's going to have to intermediate that financial transaction. It's probably going to be done through some form of a blockchain technology. We
Hang
can
on, we're
handle
talking
that.
about these massive data centers spinning around the world in satellites.
Yeah,
so-
yeah. Now, the simplest
Yeah.
form of a space market today.
So when is this going to happen?
I think it's happening.
It's happening now.
Yeah, I mean, it's not literally happening,
Yeah.
but this
It's-
is
it's
I
on the way.
already-
clearly need to renew my subscription to New Scientist because you're getting your intel from somewhere, and 100% it's a good source.
It is a really,
This
really
show has
great
just become
magazine.
a plug for the New Scientist.
It's a
It
really
has-
That's what's
great
happening
it has
right now.
I get the
Yeah.
physical copy as well and the electronic.
The
It's
physical
really
copy,
good.
listen to you.
It's
Wow.
really good.
Wow.
I
So
mean,
they call it a
the show is
newspaper.
pivoting to the future of science
Yeah,
from future
yeah,
of money.
there you go.
Yeah.
Well,
Going to-
it's
we're
convergence,
going to space data
singularity,
centers.
financial singularity.
Oh my
Financial
goodness.
Science and finance are finally gonna collide.
So you're doing this project in Abu Dhabi as well.
Well, that project. So that is what we've done with. So think of Project Diamond as the marketplace.
Okay.
And then who wants to use that marketplace? So what we want Project Diamond to be is an engine that makes things go vroom. So we don't profess to be experts in the things that are being done. So if you're an expert in commercial paper and you think this is a great rail for you, use it, right? You're the headline act. We're not underwriters. We're just building out technology. So then what's happened as we've discussed the technology, people are like, well, geez, wait, that might be helpful to solve a problem we have. So the simplest problem is the first step in space markets, I would say, if I understand it well. You have satellites running around there. People buy the bandwidth, right? So they say, okay, neat. I want to buy all the internet bandwidth from those satellites. Great. Now you have all this redundancy because they bought too much, right? And they're like, well, we can't cut it up. Like we're only using so much. We're at 50% capacity. What do we do with the other 50%? Somebody comes in and says, I'll take that 50%. Thank
Correct.
you very much. Now I have to sell it. I have to figure out location-wise. I got to sell it to somebody. So how do I do that? Well, then Sean Martinac and his development crew, they're like, well, let's think about it. And they studied the way you pinpoint that bandwidth to Earth. And they say, okay, we can do this. We can create a contract. We can create an auction system that says if you want bandwidth in this area, by locality, buy the bandwidth. And then you auction off that bandwidth for a certain amount of time, certain amount of dollars, da-da-da. Now your capacity rate goes from 50 to 100 because then everyone's like, wait, I can buy cheap bandwidth. And these are not retail, right?
Clearly.
But they're like, I can get cheap bandwidth from up top because there's excess capacity. Take it. And now I have a mechanism where I can do that. Now, Project Diamond is the vessel that's coordinated that marketplace, but it's really crypto technologies that allow that to happen. Digital dollars, blah, 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 blah.
So people come to you with scenarios, and you give them effectively the plumbing to be able to do it. Right?
Yeah,
And you give
exactly.
them the architecture to be able
Exactly.
to execute within this regulated testbed framework, which
And
is
the beauty in that
regulated.
case is the asset doesn't exist. So it's much easier when you're starting from scratch, right? Because
Right.
then people's minds are way open. If you're starting with an existing asset, they're like, why is it better? You get this on Twitter all the time. Why is it any better than what I've done already? And
real
it's-
estate.
Yeah, yeah,
Why do
yeah,
we need to
yeah,
tokenize
yeah,
real estate?
yeah,
I've got REITs.
yeah.
So you've got
So
8
you
different
gotta start
examples
digitally
and things
native.
happening.
Yeah, we've just built prototypes.
Yeah.
Now, is there a threshold of the kind of projects and industry segments that you can engage with? Does it have to be of an X size before you can engage with it to be meaningful for the development or
In
a
principle,
global
no.
pursuit?
We've passed the proof of concept phase because we're doing live transactions, so it works. And then the question is, well, if you were to do a new transaction, you want to do something else live, have we built all the features that are required? So those features take time. That's kind of we have a bandwidth problem for sure. So we can't just hit the magic switch and have it done. But at least that base layer for us is built. Whereas in a lot of cases, you go the opposite way. You build something very specialized, and then it works just for that, and you haven't built anything generalized. So then you're stuck with just that. And then all of a sudden you get the call, we're like, well, we can do X, Y, and Z, but we can only do X, Y, and Z. Can you guys do the rest? We're like, we can. We just need help. So in principle, we can cast a very, very, very wide net. In practice, I think the way it's going to end up playing out is, I think it's fair for people to be skeptical. So then how do you break that barrier? You get them to do cash management. The same thing that BlackRock's doing with their tokenized fund. So then you knock on BlackRock's door and you say, okay, you're tokenizing your fund. We can do it way cheaper. Just we're going to find a bunch of people who are going to issue short-term paper, and you're going to buy that short-term paper. You already have a digital money fund, and you're duplicating your costs. We're going to deliver those same assets from a credit perspective to your fund at a much, much cheaper and far more efficient rate. And it'll settle. You'll get a matching of settlement between the asset and the liability. Now you have a mismatch because one's digital, one's not. So you have a bit of a mismatch. Here we'll give you perfect matching of settlement. Asset liability will have perfect matching of characteristics. And then it's up to you to evaluate the credit. So then they could say, all right, this is great, and we want IBM to issue. So we want IBM paper. Then all of a sudden IBM is issuing paper and Ondo's buying the paper or whomever it is. And that's how you start natively digital. And the beauty of that step, if you don't like it, it matures. It matures and you go away. And what did it cost you? Nothing. It cost you a digital wallet, a little bit of lift in terms of compliance, and you got the experience. So I think it's reps. And the beauty of short-term paper is that's why I say one-day loan for $1. Do that 10 times and you'll get it.
So I think this is just showing how forward-thinking Abu Dhabi is in allowing something of this magnitude and importance to manifest, to actually do world-first programs. So I wonder how many people will jump on board to this program from such a large institutional capacity to back it quickly, because other ecosystems are trailing behind. It's curious.
Yeah. And also, there's this massive change happening. We talked about it before we went live, Marcel, over coffee, that there was a window for Abu Dhabi or before Singapore because Europe and particularly the US were, for whatever reason, so cautious in this space.
Still, right?
Well, I'd love to hear Marcel's thoughts.
US side of things?
What's happening since inauguration.
Good point.
We're filming this a few days after the presidential inauguration in the US. And maybe sort of to frame the question, it's been super interesting talking about space markets and everything, but let's really narrow it down to 2025, this year, the next 11 months. We're just 1 month into the year, and it feels like so much has happened already. Or we're pregnant with so much about to happen, right?
Yeah,
so much has happened.
Those signatures are flying on those,
those
dockets,
signatures
right?
are flying, yeah. So based on what we've seen since November's election and then the inauguration, how does that shape your thinking for this year? What do you expect to happen? Because whether we like it or not, the US is still the
bellwether,
largest economy in the world,
Absolutely.
largest capital, largest concentration of intellectual capital, and all of these things. And in a way, crypto has been sort of dancing around the US because of political reasons. But now I think it feels like
they mean business.
They mean business. Yeah, open
I mean,
season.
you think of
They mean business. Yeah.
A few days in, and you have a very, very clear roadmap. Now, the roadmap is to say we're going to study outcomes.
Sure.
So we don't know what those outcomes are going to be, but the direction of travel is pretty darn clear.
Right.
And look, even in Powell's most recent press conference, Federal Reserve kept rates unchanged. He was asked specifically about how crypto integrates to the banking system, and he was very favorable.
Yeah.
So this is a meaningful shift in direction.
Yeah.
What we can say, I think, definitively with what we know right now, the easy thing to say is CBDCs are in the U.S. are not happening.
Yeah.
By the way, I think that's music to the Fed's ears personally.
Yeah.
They were half-hearted about it the whole while.
Yeah.
They weren't all in on this thing.
No.
And for good reason. It doesn't scale for a central bank.
Yeah.
Financial crisis, everybody wants to face the central bank. That drains liquidity from the banking system. Very difficult. So then you cap CBDCs, and you're like, okay, what's the point?
Yeah.
So I get it. I mean, private stablecoin looks like a narrow bank.
Yeah.
And they're like, okay, that's we have a framework for that. That's a fully reserved bank. Easy.
Yeah.
So now stablecoin are the flavor of the month
Yeah.
in the US, right?
Yeah.
They've been explicitly clear that stablecoin is the pathway forward to the digitalization of the dollar.
Right.
And what's that going to be for in the payment system?
Yep.
Well, we're already seeing that with PayPal. Now Twitter.
Yeah.
Twitter's entered this space.
Yep.
They partnered with Visa.
Correct. Yeah.
Interesting choice of partner for somebody that wants to migrate into crypto rails. Visa's not the most forward thinking on crypto rails, but I'm sure there was a lot of good logic behind it. But nevertheless, 611 million people that are going to have wallets.
Active, users. Correct.
That's no joke.
Yeah.
Then you have Stripe buying Bridge for $1 billion
Yeah.
ahead of the election.
Yeah.
Right. So if you own that infrastructure, great. If you don't own it, you got to buy it or rent it.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we're going to see on the stablecoin side.
Yeah.
So then you've got that thread that's going to penetrate the banking system. And then the other thread is now banks can hold crypto in custody as they would any other asset.
Yep.
So SAB 121 is repealed. That's what prevented banks from participating in the crypto market. That is the start of an unlock of capital for the space.
Yeah.
And I think it's super important because if you think of what the Bitcoin curve or what over collateralized lending into Bitcoin tells us. When Bitcoin is strong, the cost of borrowing against Bitcoin goes up because the demand for borrowing against your collateral is going up. So in traditional markets, when the asset price is up, typically your spread is coming in. It's the opposite in crypto. Why? Because there's no fluid capital entering the system. So there's a capital constraint.
Yeah.
So now once banks have the opportunity to enter directly or indirectly, in the case of custody, it's indirect. But in the case of their own activities, it's direct. But in the case of custody, it's indirect, let's say. But once they've entered that market in one way, shape, or form, now you have an advisory pool that says, oh, here are the things you can do with those crypto assets or in the crypto space. You're going to have a massive unlock of liquidity and capital into crypto markets. Now, I think it's going to be a little more scrutinized. So you think of the old days, crypto kitties, right? Crypto kitties up, down. The whole space was like, woo, you're along for the ride. AI agents have just gone through a complete boom bust cycle.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't know it.
Yeah.
You wouldn't know it looking at the price of Bitcoin.
Yeah.
We're an inch from all-time highs.
Yeah.
And AI agents, which was the
Evaporated,
best performing asset in November, the best performing asset in December, started the year on fire, are down 50 to 75% from all-time highs, evaporated.
Were they all vaporware or?
Yeah. Well, no, I look, I think I really respect markets. So I tend to take a step back and say, okay, people are excited about something.
Yeah.
Now it may not be that one wins the day, but there's something there.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just completely made up mumbo jumbo.
Yeah.
But tulips are still around. I really like tulips. They're not what they were, right? But I tell you what,
Back to the Dutch.
like they still have pretty good tulip trade. So there's usually something there. So
Just can't buy houses for them.
No.
yeah, that's right. Just the price change. That's the price change. The same thing with rail, right? Same thing with rail. When you went through those rail booms, you had the bubble, but the bubble was required to get the infrastructure built.
You need the bubble for the capital to come in.
Exactly, and that's it. So what
every
you leave behind
new
is very
technology needs a
positive.
hype cycle and a fraud
Absolutely.
cycle.
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, we had the
Yep.
dot-com bust, right?
Yeah,
And crying out loud, we had a crypto bust. You've had volatility
these
everywhere.
cycles,
Absolutely.
Well, and the beauty of the crypto economy in that context is it does not impose systemic risk, right? There's no central bank. The market functions.
Yeah.
You want to buy at $3?
Yeah.
Price
24
tomorrow
hours
might-
a day.
price tomorrow might be
every
$1.
minute, every second. Wait,
Right.
hang on a minute. I'll just go back in.
Yeah.
So capital destruction,
Yeah.
which is the flip side of creative genius, it's a requirement. In any vibrant economy, you need creative destruction too, capital destruction. So of course, it's painful if you're participating in it. And I've had my fair share of those experiences, but it's part of the process. You have to be like, I sacrifice my capital for the betterment of the ecosystem.
That's such a good way of putting it. Right?
So noble.
It's true. You have
It really
to.
is,
You got to
right?
see the good.
Yeah.
I know.
You got to see the good.
No pain, no gain.
Ah,
That's
that's one way of putting it. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's the
yeah,
T-shirt.
So in terms of 2025, so stablecoins are a big focus, obviously. No CBDC. Anything else before you wrap up, Marcel, for 2025? Any kind of final parting thoughts for this year?
Bitcoin was the number one performing asset in 23, 24. Can it three-peat? You
Yeah.
know, can it do it again?
I don't think so.
You don't think so?
I don't think so, but I think
Yeah.
we said in the last one, right? We said Buffett does a U-turn. Is my coin
well,
flip.
there's
That's my
so
thing,
The
is that
pathway,
they do it.
the pathway is that sovereigns
Mm-hmm.
who have probably already been pretty active and just quiet about it,
Right.
stand up and say, okay, this is a future
Yeah.
reserve, and they don't do much.
Yeah.
They don't do much, but that's kind of you think of how gold behaves.
Yeah.
The dollar has been strong, but has it? Gold's within a sliver of all-time highs.
Correct.
So that's not a strong dollar environment. If the dollar were super strong, gold would be at the lows, not the highs. So what behavioral change is happening? Foreign central banks are like, something's up. There's an imbalance there that I'm not perfectly comfortable with. We can discuss what that is, but something's up. I'm buying gold. Now, they look at gold and they say, this is a pain in the neck to hold.
It is.
It is. I own it. It's a pain.
it is,
You know, and
yeah.
then you got to sell it back to the person you bought it from, or else you got to melt it and then pay the melting fee, and then they
I mean,
test
even
it.
if you hold digital gold,
Yeah. So, but then then you think, okay, is Bitcoin the pristine unit of collateral? Look, if that's the only role it plays in the ecosystem, it's kind of a bummer. But let's imagine that's the only role it plays.
Yeah.
It's the pristine unit of collateral. Everyone's going to want to own some. So now, if sovereigns raise their hand this year, look, it's Super Bowl's around the
Yeah.
corner. I know the audience is probably not a big Super Bowl audience, but you've
Yeah.
got the Chiefs could three-peat. Taylor Swift is with the Chiefs. So Bitcoin maxis are Swifties, you see?
so you're saying
You
it's
see?
the year of the hat trick.
Yes, it could be.
You're saying it's a hat
Year of the
trick year.
hat trick.
Wow,
yeah, as a
okay.
Canadian,
So
it's the year of the
so
hat
there we
trick.
go.
There we go.
It's the year of the
You're
hat
basically
trick.
talking about, we've got a few forecasts here.
We've got a
Taylor
three.
Swift,
This is the year of the
three-peat,
three-peat.
and
Year of the three-peat.
And so you're basically going for Bitcoin as the best performing asset, not financial advice, etc. But you know,
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I think that's the pathway where Bitcoin
Right.
performs. And I think what's interesting,
Yeah.
I think infrastructure is very interesting.
Right.
So if we identify infrastructure by looking at the Sonys or wherever the layer, I think
Sure.
infrastructure is critical. And infrastructure is boring.
yeah,
It's not what gets people excited, but
Yeah.
that's what's going to make this thing scale.
Correct.
And then I think, okay, what's the base layer of infrastructure for every smart contract? Not everyone, but a meaningful part. Ethereum. What's Ethereum done? It's been just the left for dead. You know,
having a
and now
midlife
everyone's
crisis,
worried about
so,
the
yeah.
Ethereum
Sloth.
Foundation and I was like, okay, so I always ask myself, what's the pain trade in the market?
yeah,
And everyone just the consensus now on Ethereum is that Ethereum is now just a utility. You know, Vitalik never really wanted to make money and and they're restructuring themselves in ways that are very, very logical and smart and will create friction and uncertainty. But I think if there's Sony built on Ethereum, you know, Base is EVM. So, you know, it's by far the highest revenue generator, you know, in the context of that ecosystem. So it's an interesting thing to keep in the back of mind. Everybody's kind of left it for dead. I think it's
what's your contrarian trade?
That's my contrarian trade. Yeah. You got
I'd
it.
love to chat more, but you need
So much
to,
more,
You,
yeah.
well, you need to get in a car and head down to the Palm right now.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
do.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure to have you. Thanks for coming down from
Thank
Abu
you
Dhabi
so
today.
much.
Gentlemen, thank you.
Thank you.